Hopes are high for a return to overseas travel as the global vaccination campaign picks up speed and countries loosen their border restrictions. Some countries have set up systems directly with each other, the systems in place for so-called travel bubbles. Last week, South Korea said it's looking at setting up travel bubbles of its own. For more on this, we have our Min Suk-hyen joining us today in the studio. Suk-hyen, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, it's true. A lot of us are looking forward to being able to travel again, and the government, I have to say, has gotten my hopes up. You've been looking into this issue in some detail. So tell us, what is a travel bubble and what is South Korea planning in this regard?
Well, a travel bubble is an exclusive travel partnership that allows people to travel freely without undergoing quarantine. The deal is usually between two or more countries that have achieved considerable success in containing and fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. South Korea is planning to create its travel bubble agreement with a few countries as early as next month. Countries top on the list include Singapore, Taiwan, Thailand, and the U.S. territories of Guam and Saipan, which are considered to be relatively safe to travel. For now, only group tours will be permitted for those fully vaccinated, and travel will be restricted to direct flights.
Travelers must stay in the travel bubble country for 14 days prior to departure. They must take a direct flight to enter the country, and upon arrival must present their vaccination certificate. Only those who test negative after a PCR test will then be exempt from quarantine.
Further details of the plan, such as specific dates, quarantine guidelines, and proof of vaccination, will be made in the coming weeks.
Well, Suk-hyen, a big point that you made just now, if anybody missed it, was that the travel bubble would only work for those who are going on group tours or tour packages together with lots of people going perhaps to Southeast Asia or something. But many of us want to travel independently or alone. So what about those of us who want to do that?
Well, for those who would like to travel, there are many countries that actually accept or allow fully vaccinated people to enter without a 14-day quarantine upon their arrival. These include Guam and Saipan, two most popular tourist destinations for South Koreans. Jeju Air has already resumed its flights to Saipan this month, and Asiana Airlines also plans to start its service for the resort island from July. Korean Air also opened tickets for Guam set to leave this November, while T-Way and Air Seoul plan to start flight services for Guam this summer. Over in Europe, Switzerland, Spain, and France are also welcoming vaccinated travelers. Good news is that those vaccinated in Korea won't need to quarantine when returning from their trip. But one thing to be careful, though, is that each country has slightly different COVID-19 protocols for incoming travelers. Some countries only grant quarantine-free entry for certain types of COVID-19 vaccines. So, for example, Guam only recognizes U.S. FDA-approved COVID-19 vaccines such as Moderna, Pfizer, or Johnson & Johnson. Those who have received AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine will have to quarantine. So you do have to look into the specific details before traveling.
Okay, so make sure to check what type of vaccine you've got, make sure what the rules are in Europe or Asia, whatever country you're going to. But now, it's been a tough time the past year and 4 months or so for the international airline industry. They've had to cut down so many flights, and it's also been tough for their staff. And the same goes for these mom and pop travel agencies. There's a lot of those in Korea. But now with the travel bubbles and other measures being taken, are they getting back on their feet?
Well, not just yet. The travel agencies and airline industries are still crippled by the pandemic. Many staff are still on unpaid leave as profits have yet to jump back to pre-pandemic levels. At the moment, they're gearing up to get their business running back again. Take a listen.
There are not many reservations for overseas travel yet, but there are more inquiries compared to the past. Right now, we're more focused on getting ready to offer safe travel packages for overseas tours.
Insiders agree that it will take a while for them to fully recover, but they say the announcement of a travel bubble last week brought great hope.
With the latest travel bubble announcement, it feels like we can finally see the end of the tunnel. The hardest part is going through a tunnel where you don't know when it's going to end. But now that we know where that is, we just need to bear it for a few more months.
Well, it's well said by the person you interviewed there, Suk-hyen, just a few more months. Some of us might say, well, we've been hearing that for quite a long time now, but it does seem like there is light at the end of the tunnel. When do you see, realistically, travel getting back to what we would consider normal?
Well, perhaps the Korean Thanksgiving Chuseok holiday will look more like pre-COVID-19 times. That's because the government aims to vaccinate about 70% of the country's total population by September. This year's Chuseok is set to run from September 20th to the 22nd, and including the weekends, it will be a 5-day holiday for all. So this is when the airline and travel industries expect to see an actual uptick in booking rates.
By the time we get to the Chuseok holiday, when most of the population has been fully vaccinated, we expect demand for overseas travel to be higher. It could be the start of a return to normal travel.
Well, Suk-hyen, on the expectation that that is what is ahead of us, a return to normal travel, one thing we've seen is a big spike in the price of airline stocks. Tell us about that, and travel-related stocks.
Absolutely. So South Korea's airline stocks have been rising significantly in line with the country's COVID-19 vaccine rollouts and high hopes for overseas travels. On the day of the travel bubble announcement, shares of Korean Air closed 4% higher at over $30, and its parent Hanjin-Kal rose 4% at about $67. Low-cost carriers saw their stocks jump on the same day, with Jeju Air up almost 6%, Jin Air 5%, and T-Air 19%. Local travel stocks were also up for the same reason. Some analysts even expect the stocks to go higher in the second half of this year.
The pent-up demand in travel means the recovery is expected to continue throughout 2023. The recovery cycle will be quite similar to that of the Lehman Brothers financial crisis that went from 2008 to 2010. The only difference is that the gains will be higher since economic fallout from the pandemic was worse.
Well, all around, a fairly optimistic outlook, I think, on this front. I hope we can say that for the industries, for the people working in these industries, and for all of us who would like to travel as we used to do. Thanks so much for your report today, Suk-hyen.
Thank you.